Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Crispin O'Driscoll stood on the high cliff, overlooking the vast ocean of water before him. At 15, he had the hunger in him. Hunger for adventure, hunger from the strange yearnings in his body, and real hunger. Ireland, and particularly the area around Baltimore, 8 miles down the Island River from Skibbereen, was particularly hard hit. It was a time of death. It was a time of famine. He looked back at the small herd of sheep and knew he was going to have to take his uncle's offer to take him to America. There were just too many mouths to feed and not enough food. As the oldest in his family, he hated the long nights of listening to the rumbling, growling noises coming from the stomachs of his brothers and sisters, watching the surf batter the broken, rocky shore with a violence seemingly aimed at his home country. It was with a heavy heart he said goodbye to the hard life his people had fallen upon. As he shouted commands to his loyal dog, he followed the decimated herd back to the overcrowded farm. Late that night, wide awake as he awaited the early call from his father's brother, he wondered if there was a lass across the wide water that could love a homely lad such as him. With his angry red hair and profusion of freckles, he knew with a bitter self-awareness that he would never be the lad the young lasses pined over. As he finally drifted off to a land of dreams, he had a vision of the lovely Mare Kinsella and the hesitant smile she had given him at the Mass on Sunday morn. His dream was of going back to the dark-eyed beauty with her pert nose with the light scattering of freckles. He would come back with a gold ring, good clothes, and driving a fine carriage pulled by a flashy pair of blacks. Ah, the great life he and Mare would live with their stout lads to work the land and their pretty lasses to please the eyes of a man in his age. Charlie sat at her makeup mirror, musing over the stories Grandpa Driscoll had told her about Crispin O'Driscoll, the first of the family to move from Ireland during the Great Potato Famine. He had settled in the small town of Baconsburg, Ohio, and found a job as an assistant to the town smithy. Later, a few years before the railroad came and the town was renamed Cortland, Crispin had been able to take over the shop and now was the blacksmith for a wide area around the town. After Crispin settled in, he started writing to the fair lass Kinsella, and to his great pleasure, she was receptive to his hints of coming to America to be his wife. 6 months later she arrived, and the long love affair between Crispin and Mare was the talk of that part of Ohio. Through the years, the Driscolls, losing the O somewhere around the emerging 20th century, were known for 3 things: their athleticism, the carroty red hair, and a surfeit of freckles. Charlie, along with her younger sister, had inherited all 3 traits. Her mom was named after the fair maiden Mare, and she had intended to pass this name down to her youngest. Due to a mix-up in the records, Mare became Marie, and as her husband told her, "'Tis a fair name for such a lovely girl." And her name was left Marie. Thinking of her upcoming date with Jim, she knew she had to tell Jim that night what had happened in Germany with Major Tomlinson. It wasn't assault, but it sure as hell wasn't from his trying. She could see her green eyes flashing in the mirror, and she knew she had to get her anger under control before Jim arrived. She was 20 minutes early and wondered if Jim would think her too anxious if he knew she had been ready so early. With a wry smile, she wondered with some awe how quickly she had fallen for him. It had been 6 months since the Cupid killer was caught, and she and Jim had been dating regularly. Sometimes she had to nudge him a little. A typical cop, he would get wrapped up in a case and not call her for a week or so. But she knew something that Jim himself didn't know. He loved her as much as she loved him. No, he didn't exactly wear his heart on his sleeve, but it was in his eyes, his gentle touches, and certainly in his kisses. Memories of their increasingly lusty petting brought a tinge of sweat to her upper lip and a redness on her cheeks, not from rouge. That's why she had to tell him about the damn Major. She couldn't give herself to him until he knew all about her. Well, almost all. There were things she just couldn't tell him. Looking in the mirror of her compact, she saw the glow on her face that came from even thinking about consummating her relationship with Jim brought to her. And she was ready to make love with him. Men, and especially men who were cops, could be so damn dense sometimes. As she heard his car drive up, she mused on what it would be like to live with him. Hopefully there would be marriage and at some point kids. She liked being a detective, but she would drop it in a minute for a child. Maybe a red-haired imp to replace her sister. This time she would get the name right, Mare. Jim picked her up, attentive, as always, in the little things, like opening the door, that she cherished so much. Working as a cop, she had to suppress her femininity, and on her off time wanted to be treated like a lady. They were back at Coatsud, which had become their favorite restaurant. "It's nice to see you, Charlie. I have to say that black dress makes those green eyes of yours shine. I was thinking, while I was driving over, how much I missed you." She hit his arm. "Jim, we were at the courthouse all morning for Murphy's sentencing. You couldn't possibly have missed me in that short of time." He smugly smiled. Well, I did. He took a sip of his wine and continued, Damn, I'm glad he copped a plea bargain. I'm always afraid some shithead on the jury will let him off. Gee, Jim, you don't have any hard feelings against jurors, do you? Looking abashed, he responded, No, not really. It's just that sometimes we work so hard to catch someone, and it really grates on me when they walk away. Anyway, it's a shame that we couldn't get him for the first Cupid murder. I guess that will go to the cold case file. We just don't have anything to go on. They looked up as the waiter delivered their dinner, and the conversation turned to more intimate things. As Jim was driving her home, she asked him, I need to talk to you about something. Can you stay for a while? When they got to her small home, Charlie went to her bedroom to slip into something more comfortable, then fixed a drink for them. Jim, we haven't really talked about where we want this relationship to go. I think it's time we sat down and had that discussion, but not tonight. Charlie, No, I need to tell you something. I've pulled away from you a couple of times when you wanted to become more intimate, and I know that it has hurt and even confused you. A relationship is hard enough without me sending you mixed signals. I don't like doing that. I don't want to do that. When I was stationed in Germany, I was involved in a sexual harassment case. It was eventually dismissed for lack of evidence. CID said it was just a situation of he said, she said. The key part was there were 2 other women that came forward, but they said it was too late for their cases. This is what led to me leaving the Army. I was just fed up with the bureaucratic bullshit. I'd had several dates with Gary Tomlinson, a major in the Division Public Affairs office. I'd fixed him dinner in my apartment, and afterwards we sat down to talk, both of us on the sofa. We were having a glass of German wine. He put his arm around me and drew me in for a kiss. I was okay with that, but I wasn't ready and didn't want anything more. I tried to jerk away from him, but he was too strong for me. He started ripping at my clothes. He tore off my blouse and bra and slapped me hard when I tried to push him away. He was trying to get my skirt off, and I was able to grab the bottle and hit him hard on the back of his head. He fell to the floor, almost unconscious. What I should have done was call the MPs at once. What I did was drag his sorry but out my front door. I was always fairly strong, and locked the door. I sat there frozen in fear for a long time, but I never heard anything. The next day I went to my commanding officer and filed a complaint. Since then I have this fear of intimacy. As soon as a man tries to touch me in an intimate place, I freeze up. Jim, I care a lot about you, and I want us to move our relationship to a new level. I want to do that now. My face blushed scarlet as I added, Jim, you don't know the dreams I've had about us. Jim reached over and touched her face. I didn't know, Charlie. I knew there was something, but I thought I'd just go slow. I've had the same kind of dreams. He put his strong arms around her and held her close. Charlie relaxed into his arms, closing her eyes against the wetness, struggling to make a tear. Charlie was wearing satin pajamas of a color to match the deep emerald of her eyes, with a matching robe. Jim held her tight, moving his hands up and down her back, feeling her relax. A few minutes later, he felt a change in her breathing, a slowing and deepening. He pulled his head back and saw that she was asleep. He carefully disengaged and, putting his arms under her, gently picked her up and carried her to her bed. Carefully laying her down, he turned up the covers on the other side of the bed, untied the bow on the robe, and moved over and lay her on the sheets. Reaching over to cover her, he felt her small hand on his shirt and looked down to see her eyes half open, a smokiness deepening the emerald color to the dark green of the deep ocean. He looked in her eyes, mesmerized. Then she pulled him to her and kissing him with a deep need. After a long moment, she pushed back at him and, eyes locked together, she undid the buttons to the top of her PJs. Her need now urgent. Both of them were beyond stopping now as they helped each other off with their clothes. The lovely sight before him awed Jim. Jim, I need you. Please now, take me. He whispered. I love you, Charlie. Suddenly sobbing, she pulled him down close. Her body was shaking with a different kind of passion from that of minutes previous. Jim was scared. He had thought she was ready, but now this? Darling, I'm sorry, No, Jim. It's fine. Everything is fine now. I just needed you so much. It's been so hard, loving you, wanting you, but being afraid to move forward. Jim turned off the light and lay next to her. The two of them cuddled as one. They both fell into a deep sleep, Jim wakening to the smell of coffee. He looked up and saw her as a beautiful vision, face scrubbed and shining. Sitting up, he took the coffee and placed it on the nightstand. Are you okay with last night? Oh, Jim, I'm more than okay. Do you love me? Oh, I know you do, but how much? Smiling, Jim reached over and took her hand, pulling her to the bed, pulling her on top of him. How about if I show you, lady? They woke after 10 and took a leisurely shower together. Charlie prepared a picnic basket and, grabbing a couple bottles of wine, drove to Lake Mosquito and found a small meadow surrounded by trees, but mostly open to the lake. It was a hot, humid day, and they ate, talked, loved, talked, drank the rest of the wine, and loved. Driving back to Charlie's house, both of them sated, neither talked, just shared a loving companionship. Their love was out in the open to be shared and enjoyed. They each felt their lives were more complete. Neither had expected to feel this deeply about another person. In their respective precincts, things were fairly quiet for a few months, and neither of them had to work too much overtime. Jim did get an award for catching the Cupid killer and was promoted to detective sergeant, but he asked his new boss to keep it quiet for a couple of days. Towards the end of September, Jim took Charlie to dinner at the Coat Sud again. He was somewhat mysterious about it. He hadn't even told her where they were going. When the valet took his car, she turned to him. "Okay, Jim Hartley, what's going on?" "Oh, I was hungry. Seemed like a good idea to get something to eat." "Gosh, I hope you're hungry too." "Well, yes, sure. You know I'm always hungry." The maitre d' led them into a back room with about a dozen tables and sat them at one at the far side of the room, with a nice view of the gardens which were lit at night. "How come we are in a room by ourselves?" Jim answered, "I'm not sure. Let me ask the waiter." He stood up and walked through the door to where the waiter stood. He appeared to chat amiably with him with a bit of arm-waving and came back. "Well," Charlie asked impatiently, "it seems that they expect to be crowded tonight. So rather than jam us, and they put us in here so we can have some peace and quiet. He did say they might have to seat several people in here." "Oh, well, okay." A waiter brought a bottle of champagne and, after pouring 2 glasses, put the bottle in a crystal ice bucket. Charlie looked over at the bucket and saw the Waterford logo and said to herself, "Damn, this looks like an expensive dinner." To Jim, she asked, "Why the champagne? Are we celebrating something?" Jim looked over at her, a serious mien on his face. "Darling, every day I see you is reason enough for celebrating. As Debbie Boone so aptly put it, you light up my life." Pleased with that, Charlie just smiled. A few minutes later, a distinguished silver-haired man with an attractive brunette on his arm came in and was seated at another table. Charlie stared at the man and nudged Jim. "Isn't that your boss? You know, Captain what's-his-name?" "Yeah, you're right. I'd better go over and say hi to him." "Excuse me." A minute later, he waved for her to come over. "Captain Adamson, this is my fiancé, Charlie Weaver." She jerked at his arm. What was he saying? They weren't engaged yet. She certainly had hopes, yes, even plans, but, "Charlie, this is my boss and his lovely wife, Joanne." They chatted for a minute, then Captain said to Charlie, "You have a great young man here. With his promotion, he is really going places." "Huh? What promotion?" She shot Jim a dirty look. Something funny was going on. A little bit later, her sister Doris and her husband Ray Hoff came in and walked over to their table. Doris kissed Jim on the cheek and then hugged Charlie. Ray shook Jim's hand and said, "Hey, congrats. Detective Sergeant ain't chicken feed." Then the two of them walked over and sat at the table with the police captain and his wife. "Okay, Jim Hartley, what in the hell is going on? Did you really get promoted?" Somewhat abashedly, he nodded and gave her a hug. Within a few minutes, both of their families and friends from both within and outside the police force came in and all congratulated Jim. Dinner proceeded, and at the end, Captain Adamson walked up to a mic that had magically appeared and gave a speech chronicling Jim's achievements, especially on the Cupid case, and formally announced his promotion. After everyone clapped, Jim walked up to the mic and thanked everyone for their help. "Charlie, can you come up here for a minute?" Groaning, Charlie walked up and stood beside him. "Without Charlie's special expertise, we never would have solved that case. I spent a lot of time with her, and we have become good friends." Charlie looked at him, aghast. The look on her face asking, what did he mean by that? Jim quickly amended, "Well, somewhat more than friends." Turning to Charlie, he put one knee on the floor, and in the palm of his hand was magically a ring. Putting the ring on her finger, he asked, "Charlie Weaver, will you marry me? Please?" Almost in shock, she stared at him. Realization finally dawning, she jumped on him, squealing, "Yes, yes. Oh God, yes, Jim." That night, Jim was told he had been a very bad boy but was treated like he had been very, very good. After some discussion, they decided they wanted to be married on Valentine's Day of the next year. "It would be fitting," Charlie insisted. Her sister, Doris, jumped in and started helping with the planning. A month after proposing, Jim moved in with Charlie. The plan was to stay there and save money for a larger house they hoped they would need later. Their love was expressed frequently, and it was mutually satisfying. They were both open to finding out what would give the other satisfaction and took joy from each other's happiness. Finally, the time of the wedding came. Jim moved into one of the local hotels for the several days before the wedding. On Valentine's Day, at 1:30 in the morning, Jim's phone in the hotel room rang. "Jim, is that you?" Recognizing her voice, he asked, "What's wrong, honey? You sound upset." "Jim, I have to come down there. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. "Wait, Charlie. I thought I was supposed to stay away from you today?" "I'll be there in a few minutes. If I don't talk to you, there won't be a wedding." Jim hung up and stood looking at the phone in a dazed shock. Not too much later, there was a soft knock on the door. Jim opened the door with some trepidation. Charlie stood there with tears running down her face and no makeup on. She looked like hell. "Charlie, what? Do you have some brandy? I need something to let me get through this." Jim looked in the minibar and found 4 small bottles of Courvoisier. He poured one in a glass for her. "What's going on, Angel? You sit in that chair and I'll sit in this one. Just listen. Please, if you love me, let me get through this. Then if you still love me, well." Jim, a very scared Jim, nodded at her to go ahead and tell him whatever she had to say. "When Marie died of the drug overdose, I was in the hospital in Germany from a car crash. Not being able to go to her funeral, to say goodbye to her was hard on me. You can understand that, can't you?" Jim nodded but didn't say anything. "So I internalized everything. I came to believe that I owed her something, that whoever was responsible for giving her the drugs should have to pay. I wasn't totally honest about why I joined the police force. Part of the reason was to be more able to look at police files. I started investigating, going over the files, talking to anyone that might have some information. I talked a lot with my sister, Doris, since she was closer to what happened than I was. She did some work on her own to find the man with the drugs. I talked to her about everything, and together we came up with a name. I looked into it more and satisfied myself that this man was the guilty one. And so the first Cupid killing happened. I tracked him for weeks and saw him. I have a cigar box of photos. Well, he gave drugs to kids and vulnerable people for free to get them hooked. I saw the lives he ruined. I saw how he had ruined Marie's life. I started planning. I knew in general how to get away with it, but I didn't want to take any chances that something would go wrong. As it turned out, I only made one mistake. I told Doris everything I found out. She knew all my plans. Could I have another brandy? And a glass of water? Numb. Jim acceded to her requests, saying nothing. I looked at every detail. I made alternative plans, and I made contingency plans. Finally, I was ready to go. I reviewed everything with my sister, and she couldn't find any fault with it. Finally, on the night I chose, I got there a half hour later than I had planned because I'd received a tip that the target had a party to stop at. I had my parking spot all selected, and when I got there I saw Doris' car. I hurried up the back way of the building which had accidentally been left unlocked. When I came out on the roof, I could see someone standing at the parapet with bow in hand. I crept closer and I could see the bow string being pulled back. Taking a chance, I whispered with a voice that would carry, "Doris, don't." It was Doris, and she was able to stop the shot. I argued with her to go home and take care of her family, that maybe this wasn't such a good thing to do. She left. I told her I'd check and make sure nothing was left behind, and waited until I knew for sure she was gone. I edged over to the wall and saw the target standing there. I'd brought my favorite bow with me, and without thinking I shot the arrow at his throat. I knew from shooting thousands and thousands of arrows where it went, so I didn't stop to see what happened. I left and went home. I killed that damn drug dealer, and I don't feel a bit bad about it. I know I might have lost your love, but I couldn't marry you without telling. Jim sat there staring at her, putting things together, remembering little things, small niggles of suspicions, reactions, etc. He looked at her, and she had a small, sad smile on her face. "What?" Jim asked. She handed Jim one of the small plastic-coated cards they used to read from to give the Miranda warning. "You'd better use this in case I say something from here on that you might want to use as evidence against me." Damn, Jim thought. A stupid rookie mistake. But then he thought about the big picture. The wedding in a few hours, how much he loved her, what was important in life. Jim took her hand and led her to the bed. They crawled under the covers and fell into a deep sleep. At least Charlie did. Jim lay there, wide awake, thinking, "Why did you tell me, Charlie? Damn, I wish you hadn't." The next day the wedding went off as planned and everyone migrated over to the hall where the reception was. Jim seemed to drink more than normal, but hell, it was a wedding. When Jim was pretty close to 3 sheets to the wind on late evening of Valentine's Day, he found himself dancing with Doris. Jim, when you have a chance, I have a small confession to make to you. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.